Are you tired of telling yourself it's not that bad after another painful interaction with your parents? I'm Asha Wilkerson, and I help Black women and women of color heal deep father wounds and challenging family relationships. If you're ready to stop making excuses for someone who keeps hurting you and actually begin to heal, then this video is for you. These are the steps that I walk my clients through every day. Before we dive in, I want you to download my 21-day needs journal. I created this specifically for you because most of us don't actually know what our needs are. We know that we should have some, we know that they're not being met, we feel some kind of way, but this journal will actually help you get clear on what they are so then you can express them to those around you. Grab the link below and start your healing journey today. Okay, so let's get right into it. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had recently after talking about healing the father wound where people say, I know they don't really mean it. I know they're actually just hurt. I know that they have no idea how much their words impact me, or I wish I could just not react and then it would all be better. But what this does is it absolutely ignores the impact that your parent has on you. It excuses their behavior every single time you justify it, every time you try to explain it away and say, well, I understand, or I get it, or I know they don't mean it. It absolutely glosses over the impact that it has for you, which then means that there's some disconnect in your body. There's some friction in your body because subconsciously you know that it's not okay, but your conscious brain is trying to convince you that it's okay. And if you're not sure that you see yourself in this, just watch yourself next time your parent says something extremely hurtful or has some kind of behavioral outburst or does something that you don't like. Watch what you say to explain it away. Watch how you talk about their behavior. And if you find yourself justifying, explaining, or making excuses, it means that you are actually deep down denying the impact and the experience that it had on you. And in order to begin to heal from a difficult parent relationship, or even just to change the dynamics, you have to stop justifying your behavior and you have to call a spade a spade. If it's abusive, call it abusive. If it's emotionally manipulative, call it manipulative. If it's hurtful, call it hurtful. But I get it because there's a part of you that's trying to preserve and maintain the relationship. So this is really challenging to do. But this is your first step. Stop justifying and call it what it is. The second step after you stop justifying their behavior is to admit how much it hurt you. You have to admit it to yourself, and then I would suggest that you admit it to someone who you trust, whether that's a really good friend, a family member, a therapist, or even a coach. And before you start talking to people about it, make sure that it is actually someone who can hold space for you, who's not going to make excuses for you, but is also not going to blame you or try to talk you out of the situation that you are experiencing. Now, in my own healing journey with my father passed away in 2020, but before that, he was re-diagnosed with prostate cancer. And in 2017 or 2018, I got back into therapy because I knew that he was going to die at some point. Everybody dies at some point, but I had more evidence. I had not a date because they didn't give him a time, or at least he didn't tell that to me, but it was more tangible because I knew he was going back in for chemo treatment. And I decided to engage with a therapist again. And I remember him telling me, Asha, you can take away the power that your dad's words have for you. They're just rubber bullets. And I remember thinking, yeah, you're right. I guess they don't have to penetrate. But just because they're rubber bullets doesn't mean I want to stand in front of the firing squad, because rubber bullets still cause damage. They leave bruises, they cause internal bleeding. And while they may not penetrate and they may not destroy me like they used to before I learned to put up some armor, they still are really uncomfortable. And I had to admit to myself that these rubber bullets, even though I wasn't going to let them fully penetrate, they still hurt. My dad would say all kinds of wild things to me. He'd bring up things from childhood when I was in middle school about how he would call me lazy and say I didn't want to work hard, and how he would blame me and my mother for him feeling left out of the family relationship, and how he would never take responsibility for his role in any of the dynamics of our relationship. And at some point, I had to get to the point where I said, this fucking hurts. It actually hurts. And then I could stop justifying the behavior and I could actually just feel what I needed to feel. Yeah, this relationship is hurtful. Yeah, these things are really hurtful. But I had to find the right person to be able to explain that to, because even my therapist didn't just allow me to feel the pain. And so I got really good at finding the words and I got really good at using strategies, but it also dismissed and covered up what I was feeling inside. And I did not truly begin to make great strides on my healing journey until after my dad passed away, because then I felt like I had permission to share my side of the story. I didn't need to keep up appearances anymore. Or maybe I just didn't care. I didn't care anymore, whereas I cared beforehand. And I wish that I would have had a coach or a therapist or a friend who could have held space for me and just allowed me to admit, yeah, that was really hurtful. And I think it's much harder to do when there's emotional abuse or verbal abuse or manipulation because it's intangible. Whereas when there's physical pain, where there's a physical bruise on your body, it's much easier to point to and say, see, look right here, this hurts. But the emotional stuff, most people don't see. And so it's really hard to admit that it's happening. And also, I wanted to be mentally tough. I wasn't going to just lay down and let the filleting of my emotions just show to the world. But that was one of the defense mechanisms that I developed in order to get me through childhood. But in adulthood, when I had more agency, I had to let it go and I had to admit how painful the relationship between my dad and myself was at multiple times throughout my life so I could really begin to heal. Now, the third thing that you need to do after you admit to yourself what pain you have experienced is really ask yourself, what do I need in order to get comfort right now? If I were an adult looking down at myself and I saw myself as this lovable being, maybe this little kid, how would you comfort yourself from that perspective? And it's not the indulgent stuff like, let me go get ice cream. When a kid falls down and is hurt, the parent goes to pick the kid up, wraps their arms around the kid, and makes sure that they stay in physical contact with them until that kid feels safe. What is the equivalent that you need for yourself? And if you have no idea where to start with that, ask yourself what you want your parent to do. What do you keep hoping that your parent will do? What do you keep hoping that your parent will say? How do you keep hoping that your parent will act towards you? And that's how you know that's exactly what you need, and that's what you need to give yourself. I wanted my dad to stop saying mean and hurtful things to me. And I had to make sure that I stopped saying mean and hurtful things to myself so I could set a new standard, so that I recognized when someone else said them to me, it was unfamiliar and unwanted. But when I continued to criticize myself because I learned it from my parents, because I learned these high standards that I quickly turned into self-criticism, I needed to change that so then his criticism became unfamiliar and foreign and I could say, nope, that's not what I want. I know that's not true about myself. This is not only not helpful, but you're just saying it to be mean and damaging, and I'm not doing that. So I had to learn what I needed from myself. Most of the time as a kid, I just wanted to be heard. Even with my dad as an adult, I wanted to be heard. I wanted him to listen to what the impact was on me. And I also, again, had to admit that there was a big impact on me and acknowledge it for myself first, because I couldn't get it from him and I wasn't giving it to myself. But as soon as I did, as soon as I said, yeah, this hurt, and now I just need to acknowledge it, I just need to recognize it and be seen in it. And once I was able to recognize it and see it in myself, the healing began to happen and it really changed the dynamics of our relationship, before he passed away, and also it continued even after he passed away. Whenever I work with my clients, I always make sure to really highlight and explain that true self-love is different from self-indulgence. Self-love is about care and protection. It's not about just doing the fun things, buying a new bag because it feels good, taking a trip to escape. It's really about caring for yourself and protecting yourself. It's about allowing yourself to be your number one priority instead of prioritizing everybody else, your parents, your siblings, your children, your friends, your work above yourself. You have to love yourself, care for yourself, and protect yourself first, especially if you're going to choose to continue to engage in these challenging and difficult relationships. So let's get real for a second and tell me in the comments, do you tend to find yourself making excuses for your parents, or do you find yourself shutting down and avoiding the pain altogether? In the comments, tell me excuses or avoidance. The fourth thing that you need to do after you have stopped justifying, after you have admitted to yourself what you are experiencing, after you have determined what self-care you need, is then to set some boundaries. Now, this can be difficult because parents often walk all over the boundaries because you're a child and you're not used to asserting yourself and saying, hey, no, this is not okay, for a number of reasons, because you've been the child in the relationship your entire life. There's cultural reasons, there's societal reasons. Everybody tells us to honor our mother and our father. That comes from the Bible, but they don't tell the parents to honor the children. So setting boundaries can be a really, really challenging thing, but you have to if you're going to continue to engage in this relationship. And you have to, even if you're going to not engage in the relationship, that's also a boundary that you can set. So here's some boundaries that I ended up setting in my relationship with my dad. I would always schedule something else after we were supposed to meet together. So it would cut our time down to maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And I always had an excuse that, oh, I've got to go. I need to go meet up with so-and-so, or I've got to go to the gym, or I need to go back and do this work. And it allowed me to know that I was only going to be with him for 2 hours at the most, because I knew that if it was too much time, the communication was going to break down. If it was too much time, I felt like it was just more opportunity for him to start shooting rubber bullets at me, and I didn't want to be there. Another boundary that I was able to set is that I didn't have to pick up the phone every single time he called. I could call him back when I was on the move. I had a lot of phone call conversations. I could also call him back the next day. I could wait a couple days. My dad didn't have a cell phone and didn't text, so I couldn't shoot him a text, but I allowed myself to pick and choose when I was going to be responsive, so I didn't feel like I had to answer the phone right away every single time. And that ended up working because then I could make sure that I was in the right headspace to be able to deal with him just in case something happened. Now, not every conversation was challenging. Not every interaction was painful or hurtful, but part of the challenge of being in a relationship with a narcissistic parent or an abusive parent is that you just don't know when it's gonna come. And that is more challenging than having someone be consistently absent, having someone be consistently abusive, having someone be just ridiculous all the time. It's the yo-yo. Our nervous systems want to know what we can expect. And when the behavior is unpredictable, it is even more challenging than just consistent bad behavior. So I made sure that I set time limits and also responded or engaged when I had a container around me so that it wouldn't just go on and on and on. And so I didn't have to feel bad about saying I need to go. You know, at the end of my dad's life, he was also really lonely because he ended up isolating himself. And so I was the one who was closest to him. I was the one who ended up taking him to doctor's appointments, and he would allow me to sit in on the medical appointments. And he even told me that he wanted to repair our relationship so I could hold his hand when he passed away. So even at the very end, he was still thinking about what would be comforting for him, and I get it, but it was never about what was going to be good or helpful for me. He wasn't interested in healing so that I could be okay. He was interested in repairing enough so that I could be there for him. And I wasn't even mad about it because I understood where he was and what his limitations were, but I also knew that I wasn't going to be a martyr for this relationship. I didn't need to cause unnecessary harm or damage or exposure for myself just to show up and be the daughter that I wanted to be. I knew that I had to set some boundaries in order to protect myself so that I could actually show up and have a decent time, or could actually show up and be supportive. But I knew that I couldn't do that if I just gave my entire self away. So what boundaries do you need to set to be in relationship like you want to be in relationship, or so that things just don't get out of hand because there's no parameters around the interaction? A couple years ago, I worked with a client who had a difficult mother. The mother would guilt trip her about not coming to visit often enough, and would say things about her relationship with her now fiance, and just the things were challenging. And she wanted to spend time with her mother, but she knew that it would be too much if her mom were to come to her house because she would never leave, or she would just make comments about all the things that my client needed to change about her house or how she was interacting with her partner. So we came up with the idea of meeting on neutral ground. And so they ended up going to this botanical garden that was halfway between where the mom lived and where my client lived. And she chose a time, I think it was like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. The park or the garden closed at 4 p.m. So then they could walk through the garden and there was a natural end time. And she reported back to me that it was the best suggestion because it was a short amount of time. They were on neutral ground. They both enjoyed it. And then they were able to go on back to their respective houses and move on with their lives. And so setting boundaries and deciding what works for you can actually be a great tool to use to actually change the dynamics of the relationship and engage in a way that feels healthy, encouraging, and supportive. Now, if you're ready to put yourself first and finally get clear on your needs, don't forget to download the 21-day needs journal that will help you get started on your journey. It's in the description below. You deserve real care, real protection, and real healing. Be sure to check out my other videos on setting boundaries and healing the father wound, and I'll see you in the next one.